As Harvard University and many Ivy League and high-achieving educational institutions in America reel from massive displays of anti-Semitism and also nonsense third-world barbarism on their campuses, it is incumbent upon us as Americans to ask ourselves this question: when will we begin to reevaluate totally and completely our own relationship with the tyranny of the Ivy League University? Indeed, this is a topic that's not even new. There have been authors throughout generations and generations, like the great, one of my favorite intellectual figures in conservative history, William F. Buckley, who wrote God and Man at Yale, and excoriated the left-wing professors at Yale University for being anti-Christian and being anti-tradition on the basis of academic freedom. You see, certain concepts sound great, and if you are a pluralistic individual like me, if you are a classical liberal conservative like me, you will automatically gravitate to them on first specs. But when you investigate these concepts, you find that their names are deceiving, and those who use them are even more deceiving than their names. And in the name of freedom, they will quash certain views, and they will, with impunity, impose ideological sanctions upon students, and they can't be stopped, because they either have tenure or they have some other vestige protected by the institution. This is the reality in universities across America. It's even worse in the Ivy League, which is one of the reasons why many conservative students, according to estimates and numbers, just don't speak up. They don't speak up because they understand the intellectual environments of their areas are incredibly hostile to them. But of course, they also understand that if they wish to succeed in this society of status, it looks good to have certain institutional validations that will give them a leg up in that rat race. And this is what I want to talk to you guys about today. It's the society of status, the Ivy League, and how both of those two things actually contradict the foundations of American civilization. Many of you may have heard that 34 student groups at the beginning of the current iteration of the Israel-Hamas conflict, Israel-Palestine conflict, 34 student groups unequivocally blamed the recent aggression, Hamas going into southern Israel, going into kibbutzes, shooting up people, dragging out children and killing children, burning bodies. They blamed all of that solely on the state of Israel, to massive rejoinder from the rest of society. Bill Ackman, who is a sort of progressive leftist activist hedge fund manager, who has taken on a lot of different foes like the multi-level marketing scheme Herbalife and so on and so forth, Bill Ackman basically said, I want to know the names of every single student that signed on to that letter. And I want to know so I don't have to hire them. And several other CEOs got on board with him and said the same thing. We don't want to hire terrorist sympathizers. So then the president of Harvard immediately releases a statement that day trying to distance herself and the institution from the students. But that was criticized because it never actually condemned Hamas. It never actually condemned terrorism for what it is. And then she releases another letter doing that in a very soft way. And a lot of people were mad at Harvard. And people like Lawrence Summers, who was the president of Harvard for many years, and actually is one of the reasons why I think a lot of this chaos is happening. He even came out and said, yes, I knew that this anti-Semitism was real and it existed for a very long time. But a lot of people are not seeing, not just Harvard, but the Ivy League University for what it represents philosophically. They are merely directing their rage towards it because of a particular event that happened in a temporal moment, which says something about it in this moment in time, but in all reality doesn't speak to the eternal truths that are violated by the very existence of the current iteration of the Ivy League University. As I mentioned, America, I mentioned this, alluded to this, America is not a society of status. Ivy League universities are actually holdovers, in my opinion, ideologically from old world Europe, where status was what defined you and your path in society as a human being. Either your birth into a particular noble family, your position in the feudal system, your position in society, something that went beyond your free will, went beyond you as a human being. That is what defined you as a person, and that is what gave you social capital to continue progressing throughout the world. This wasn't just the case in Europe. This was the case literally throughout a lot of human history, a lot of ancient human history. What do you think the idea of the divine right of kings is? The divine right of kings is an attempt to pervert religion, pervert the transcendent, and then manipulate that into some kind of pseudo-mandate for political rule when the transcendent and the political are in two different categories and therefore can't be crossed over without an egregious category error being made. This is what the theocrats of yore and today don't understand. This is what the post-liberals don't understand. And yet this was used for thousands of years to establish legitimacy for political authority. A category error, a default in logic, a deviation from thinking was what shaped civilization for year after year after year after year in the old world. But America happened. And like a spark that lit the flame, and that flame, not just being a small candlelight, but being a massive conflagration, took over that entire continent of North America and established a civilization that operates on a very core, distinct set of propositions. One of them being, the basis being, that reality as a proposition matters. And we can deduce things not just from society, not from kings, not from institutional authority, but from external forces that guide and direct human life, regardless of if we want to recognize them or not. And then from that premise came the individual matters, and the individual has value, and the individual is the beginning of ethical and moral thinking. And from that premise came, okay, if the individual matters, then how governance is established, consent, that matters too. So individuals must consent to rule. Rule is not passed down from status. Rule is given from the bottom up from the individual. And if that matters, then not only does the individual consent, but the individual has certain things about them that need indispensable protection from the government and that restrict the scope of political authority. This was, in any sane reading of history, this was the contribution of the American experiment to the developed world. The New World mentality that put emphasis on character, on values, on free will, as opposed to status markers that were given to you from some force outside yourself. Christian, why have we gone through this philosophical rant? Because I'm trying to contextualize this for you. So if we've established this was America's contribution to the free world, then we have to also understand something. When the Ivy League university, particularly Harvard, was established, it was a Puritan force. It was a puritanical organization. And we understand from history the Puritans were not the most open-minded, not the most open-willed. They were very closed and very rigid. But then, as time went on, Harvard became Unitarian. Now, Unitarian Universalism is this idea, this deviation of Christianity that rejects dogma, rejects the Trinity, rejects all Christian notions, and puts an emphasis on the deeds and the life and the experience of the person, as opposed to higher moral duties that transcend the person. Okay, and so this happens. And then as history progresses, the progressives come along and basically say, as Woodrow Wilson said in his essay on the study of administration, 1887, he basically says, first principles and higher moral duties, that doesn't matter. What matters is the condition of society and the condition of people in society. Okay, after this period happens, you get the whole Frankfurt School and their machinations, which eventually become the orthodoxy in universities. You get intersectionality, you get all this stuff that happens. And Harvard, as was reported by a very intelligent author in The Spectator, and I'll have this link in the bottom section down below, and in the content down below, Harvard began expressing this long history of the devaluation of standards, the destruction of morals, and the promotion of lived experience. Harvard began to express this when Lawrence Summers became president in 2001, because there was a big push against Israel in that moment from the Harvard faculty. And Lawrence Summers' Jewishness became a subject of contention. What am I saying? I'm saying that Harvard went from being a university, which even when they were a puritanical university, they were primarily based on good morals, sound thinking, and understanding the prerequisites for civilization. They went from that to being a university that devoured standards, that became much more open, much more relative and subjectivist. And then, as time progressed, they began to embrace policies that progressives and leftists have embraced, like affirmative action and this sort of focus on society, this sort of social moral ethos that deviates from the first principles, universal ethos that is proper. And then this resulted in all the things we're seeing, the intellectual indoctrination, the conformity, all of it is downstream from this process. And all those ideas I just mentioned to you are reflective of the society of status. But even more so than that, think about how Harvard and Princeton and Oxford or Georgetown, where there were flyers put up by students that basically said that decolonialism is supposed to be a tangible reality, not a theory, meaning they want to go ahead and destroy governments they believe are colonial. Park that right there for a second. All these universities, when someone says, I go to Harvard, or I go to Oxford, or I go to Princeton, what's the immediate reaction they garner? Ooh, oh my gosh, you go there? Oh, you're so smart. Oh, you're not even considering the character of that person, their values, their actions, their behaviors, their systems. No, you estimate that person by their affiliation with an institution. Now, Ralph Waldo Emerson called this phenomenon the blind man's bluff of conformity. And he said, I'm going to read a small passage from his exquisite work, Self-Reliance. And he said, if I know your sect, I anticipate your argument. I hear a preacher announce for his text and the topic, the expediency of one of the institutions of his church. Do I not know beforehand that not possibly can he say a new and spontaneous word? Do I not know that with all this ostentation of examining the grounds of the institution, he will do no such thing? Do I not know that he is pledged to himself not to look, but at one side, the permitted side, not as a man, but as a parish minister? He is a retained attorney. And these heirs of the bench are the emptiest affectation. You see what he's saying? When you cast yourself as a product of an institution, then no longer can I understand what you think, or what you believe, or what you value. In other words, I can't understand you as an individual. You solely become a product of that institution. Let's think about this in a more long-range view. Think about your favorite celebrity, and think about what they're associated with. Now, think about someone who's an up-and-comer and tries to collaborate with that celebrity. By no fault of their own, that up-and-comer may very well be seen as that person who collaborated with that famous celebrity. Not because that up-and-comer is poor in work, not because they have no skills, no. But because our society is poisoned with the status object mentality that says you are only as good as that which is most known, that which is well known, or that which is well regarded. This mentality is so deep-seated into all of us on a subconscious level. Even if you are like me, a strong individualist, a methodological individualist, this will still seem evident to you. And this is the problem. And Emerson goes on to say that badges and societies and institutions don't make me understand you. But in the society of status, badges, institutions, reputation, that's what mattered. And that's what defined you. But New World Americanism is not about that. New World Americanism is about that rugged individualist, self-reliant, self-directing, free will moved person who can forge his own life, even if society is against him. New World Americanism is a sort of revolution of values which placed emphasis on the transcendent and the spiritual, which would be your free will, as opposed to the material, which would caste you're born in, what title you have, what status you have. I've had people in my own life tell me, Christian, go work for a network as opposed to being an independent YouTuber because you'll have more gravitas that way. Well, guess what? I'm not going to sit here and be a paid attorney for some brand when I, as a human being, have a spirit that can't be contained by a single brand. I can't be contained by a single institution. I'm Christian Watson, and you, my friend, you are you. And you have sentiments that can't be contained by a collaboration, by a status symbol, by an idea. You have things that can only be expressed in their truest and most fullest and most coherent form by you. And that's what matters. And that's what America understood. That's what the New World mentality is. That's how the New World mentality defeated the Old World mentality. And that's how, under the New World mentality, civilization progressed in America. Compared to thousands of years of human history, in 200 plus years of America, we have seen so much innovation, creativity, we have seen so much potential unleashed because the correct principles were identified in 1776 and they were then used to go against ideas that were corrosive to the human spirit, and then that was used to affect a change in how people thought and what they did. And yet these universities are more about the status and how things appear, as opposed to what things are substantively. Whether it be Harvard, Princeton, I don't care. It is high time for us to leave these ideologically captured institutions behind and to return back to a system of merit that prioritizes individuals, their skills, and what they do, as opposed to where they went to college, as opposed to what connections they have, as opposed to who their father or their mother is. There are, of course, small instances of the society of status in our present society. But that society of status needs to be rejected for the society of contract, for the society of New World Americanism. Because if it's not, then the very thing that distinguished America, that made us the pinnacle of Western civilization, which I do believe we are by virtue of our values, by virtue of our civilizations, virtue of our innovations, those things will be washed away by this crude game of favoritism, nepotism, and every other vice under the sun, which allows a lot of people who are low-performing, low-quality individuals to rise to the top and stay there, not by force of their own will, but by the approval of someone who made it long before them. You may say, Christian, this is how every society works. Well, guess what? That's why America is different, because America is not every society. If you were on the frontier when America was still expanding, you didn't have any status to save you. Either you had the ability to convert wood into sustenance for yourself, either you had the ability to cook food, hunt food and cook food, either you had the ability to survive in an area where society was scarce, or you died. We have forgotten that. As Americans, we've forgotten what that feels like. We've forgotten what that pursuit, that ever continuous pursuit for greatness feels like. And we have supplemented it with mediocre musings from influencers, so-called influencers, from status institutions like universities. And we have outsourced so much of it to the products of our innovation that would have been impossible if it were not for that rustic individualistic mindset that was about survival and greatness as opposed to complacency. This is why a lot of Ivy League universities are captured by the left wing, because they are complacent. Status thinking breeds complacency. Complacency breeds single-mindedness, and single-mindedness destroys greatness. The society of status is undoubtedly seen in the orthodoxies of the Ivy League universities, which prevent dissent beyond the margins of academic acceptability, that discourage iconoclasm. There's a reason why professors like Brett Weinstein will get literally thrown from their institutions in the name of justice when all they are doing are presenting an iconoclastic viewpoint. There is a reason, my friends, that that universities like this will line up behind Black Lives Matter, line up behind Ukraine, line up behind Palestine, because there is this general idea that is within these margins of acceptability that you must support certain things if you wish to be a legitimate inheritor of the society of status. When status matters and truth does not matter, you will do whatever you can to preserve your status, and you will have no regard to what is right. Because when status matters, you're worried about your contacts, your social group. You're worried about those who have favor with you. You're worried about if you're going to be able to get this research assignment in Germany if you're a professor. You're worried about if the president's going to be able to raise your salary. You may be worried about if you're going to get tenure. You're worried about even getting fired. But guess what? Guess what? Woe be unto you when men say all manner of good about you and about your assignment. When you are someone who is standing against this world, standing against the mediocrities therein, you will be ostracized, you will be alienated, you will be called all kind of names. I know because I lived it, and I still live it to this day. You will be called all kind of names. People will doubt you. People will throw cold water on your ambitions. People will just sit there and say, oh, you can't do that. Who in your family has done this? You can't do that. They will go against you because you are on a path of righteousness. But the society of status doesn't care about any of that. Who would a man be if he sacrifices his integrity for a little bit of social capital? I no longer know him. He has just committed intellectual and moral suicide. Who would a man be to do that? And yet so many of us do it every day because we want to be loved and understood and cared about. You need to be worried about being loved not by people, but by higher moral ideas, because those are what will sustain you and sustain your soul. The words and the affections of people are temporary, and they don't really matter. America, let's move beyond Harvard, Princeton, all of them, and let us embrace a new way at seeing merit and achievement in this society before the spoils of our ancestors are lost to the cold, materialistic, and rather dreary society of status, which has infected America from Europe. My friends, I love you guys so much. If you love me, like this video, comment on this video, share this video, subscribe to this video. Be sure to donate to me on my Patreon, my PayPal, my Locals, christianwatson.locals.com. Locals is one of the most important platforms for me. Be sure to go there, buy me a coffee, all of that. I love you guys so much, and if you love me, I want you to do one thing. Please study history, study philosophy, and most importantly, stay pensive. Bye, everyone.